Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Coffee with Katie. I have my Not Today Satan mug, which is semi-applicable for today's video. I do have one of my Bookish Box long sleeve tees shirts. They recently have been coming out with this like sword collection and I love it regardless if I've read the books or not. The collection is so fun. This is from Blood and Ash and I like it because it says right here, so incredibly violent, which is kind of a joke between like me and my husband. He's like, you're just so violent. It's cute, it's funny, and I just liked it. But the back is beautiful. Let me see if I can arrange this. You might not be able to see the back, but basically it's like the dagger. And I just really like the designs of these shirts. I think it's really fun. So shouting out some Bookish Box stuff there. I also have their Sting version. It's impeccable. So today's video is going to be a recommendation video, and it's going to be book recommendations for spooky season, for like to read around Halloween or when you're feeling kind of like you want something creepy or eerie. I will preface this with saying I'm not going to be recommending like straight horror books because that's not the kind of books I read. I can read books that have like really gruesome elements or that are kind of creepy and eerie, maybe really dark in theming, but I don't read just like straight horror. So I thought I would make some recommendations for you guys. Most of these are going to be fantasy, but I just thought it would be kind of fun to tell you guys just some books that I think would be appropriate for spooky season or when you want to read something kind of creepy, but you don't want to have like nightmares. At least in my opinion. I think I have a higher level of creepiness than others, but again, I don't like horror, but I really like forensics and crime and stuff like that. So I thought I would give you guys some recommendations, and I do have it split up into a couple of different categories, if you will, if you can call it that, but just more so recommendations for like the adult, the YA, or like the more fluffy side, the more gruesome side, just kind of a lot of different takes on it. You'll see what I mean when I'm going through it, but hopefully you enjoy this video. I just had this idea and thought it might be a fun video to get up for you guys. So we're just going to go ahead and get into my recommendations. I do have quite a few. So the first kind of category, if you will, is going to be if you're wanting more of a murder mystery type of a read with a spooky setting. And that can also vary depending on the book, which you'll see what I mean, but we'll just go into the books individually. So of course, the first book in this category would be Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. This is a 4-book series, and you are following Audrey Rose and then another main character that you meet in this book, and she is a forensic student, but it's set in 1800s England, and so her being a forensic student is kind of frowned upon because she is a woman. But as she's training on cadavers with her uncle to be a forensic student, they start coming upon these victims that have been murdered, and this is before the term serial killer was formed, and so they're kind of seeing patterns that this one man is killing all of these women, and he is dubbed Jack the Ripper. So she kind of gets pulled into solving the murder mystery of Jack the Ripper, hence the title, Stalking Jack the Ripper. And this series as a whole is fantastic. Each book I think holds its own and is really good. The second book was probably my least favorite, but I still highly recommend this series. So if you really like the forensics elements, if you like the idea of going and looking at the cadavers and figuring out how they died and being able to solve crimes with that, I would highly recommend this book. This series, I will warn you, there are a couple of books in here that have moments that are extremely gruesome. It's still YA, loosely, but I would say if you can't stomach things with like cadavers and bodies and the way they're murdered, I would maybe shy away from this, but I think it's few and far between enough that you could still read it. But just kind of be warned, there are gruesome elements that are really creepy and eerie. I really loved that about this series, but I know why. I know some other people may not. But if you're here for creepy, spooky recommendations, I would recommend this because it's not set in a fantasy world, right? So it's historical fiction, and there are elements where it kind of toes the line of like, I don't think that would actually ever happen or be feasible, but it's not fantasy. So if you're not into fantasy or things like that, I would recommend this. The storytelling is great. Carrie Maniscalco actually does a lot of research behind Jack the Ripper and a lot of famous murderers to write these books in every book that she writes, and she talks about that in the back of the book, and it's really, really cool because she does delve into a lot of the history and a lot of how the murderers actually operated. So it was really fun and interesting for me, but again, I really like forensics and stuff, so if that's not your thing, obviously skip this, but If you really want something kind of spooky, creepy, more forensic crime focused, solving a mystery, and you want it to kind of have that intensity of like a thriller, but you don't want it to be a horror and you don't want fantasy elements, I would absolutely recommend this. There's a lot of humor in this as well, and it is great. There's a character in here, Thomas Cresswell, that is fantastic. I love him. And overall, just a fantastic series that I would highly recommend. So potentially pick this up if you're looking for something like that this spooky season. The next one I'm going to talk about, I haven't finished. I've barely started reading it, but I think it would fit into this category well, which is why I'm bringing it up. So, you know, I don't have a lot of personal opinions about the story yet, but I will soon and be able to tell you about those. But for now, I'm gonna kind of give you a recommendation based on theming. And that is Belladonna by Adeline Grace. Now you're following the main character, Signa, and everyone around her kind of believes that she's cursed because everybody that is put in charge of her ends up dying. So her parents died, and then she keeps like being moved to different houses, and then they kind of all end up dying and having these horrible things happen to them. And so they think that she is cursed, and kind of nobody wants anything to do with her. And then she gets to another host home, and they start getting ill and kind of getting sick and possibly dying, and they figure out that the people are being poisoned. And so she kind of delves into trying to solve this mystery, try to figure out why this is happening, what's going on, who's doing this. And so there is that kind of murder mystery element to this story, but it is fantastical. So she has some sort of like ability, I believe, and she's also trying to team up with Death. So it's Death personified as a being, and she teams up with him to try to solve these murders. And I believe it kind of turns into a romance. I'm not positive. Again, I haven't read it. I haven't finished the whole thing. But if that sounds interesting to you, where it's a murder mystery element, but it's set in a fantastical world where she can team up with Death personified and very like gothic centered and focused on poisons, I think you would like this book. From those that have read it, I've heard that there are semi-horror elements to this book. It's not a horror, but there's parts of it that are just like, wow, that's really creepy. So just be aware of that if you are going into it. But I would say if you're looking for a fantasy that has the murder mystery element, this is for you. Another book that I highly recommend all the time whenever people tell me they like murder mysteries and thrillers is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. So this book is wild. It is 5 stars, like so good, but you kind of have to know what you're getting into when you go into it. So this is a murder mystery-ish type story, but it has like sci-fi elements, and I know that sounds insane, but let me just explain it to you. You're following this main character, Aidan Bishop, but he wakes up, he has no idea where he is, he has no idea what's happening, he's forgetting everything as he's starting to take these steps as he like wakes up. All he knows is that he's supposed to solve this suicide. So people are saying it's a suicide, he thinks it is a murder, or he's trying to prove that it's a murder. And so you're kind of going into it like, is it a suicide? Is it a murder? And he has 8 days to do this. And this entire investigation is set at this house party. So think about like, you know, back in the day when they had house parties, everyone came to the estate, everyone stayed in the house, in the manor, in the different cottages around the estate for the length of the party, whether that was a week, a month, however long. So all of the guests are on the property. He cannot leave the property. And every day he wakes up in another guest's body. So one day he'll wake up in this guy's body, and one day he'll wake up in this guy's body. And he carries with him the memories of each guest. So he wakes up the first day, he knows nothing. He's trying to solve it the next day. When he wakes up in this person's body, he still has his memories from the first day, but he's like in another body and trying to solve the murder from all of the different influences and memories of that person and their personality. But the catch is, he only has 8 days, and once that ends, it's over. And so there's a really tight time crunch with this book. There's sci-fi elements, obviously, with this like body hopping situation, almost time travel-esque. You don't know how they got there. You don't know who he is, really. You just know that he's trying to solve this case. You don't know if it's a suicide. You don't know if it was a murder. And also, there are people that are in the same position he is, so they're in different bodies at different times, that are actively trying to kill him so that he cannot solve the mystery. So yeah, it's got the creepy elements of like, people are trying to kill him, people are trying to get him to not look into this case, not solve the case. He's trying to figure out in a very limited amount of time. It's just really, really cool. So it's just crazy. You don't know who's the enemy. You don't know who's right. You don't really know who to trust. It's a wild ride, and it was fantastic. And this is not a genre I would usually pick up at all, but I heard about it and thought it sounded so intriguing, and so I gave it a shot, and I was so happy I did, because this book is just like another tier of creativity and amazingness on its own. It is fantastic. If the premise is at all interesting to you, I implore you to pick this up and give it a shot, because it is fantastic and I loved it. I read it years ago and I still think about it and still rave about it. So if you've been hesitant to pick this up, hesitate no longer. Do it. This is a good time to do it. The next one I'm going to talk about may confuse you guys, because I did read this book and I didn't love it. It was fine. It was okay, but it wasn't something I like rave about, and I haven't really talked about it much. But I do want to recommend books that I didn't necessarily prefer if it fits a theme or a recommendation list that I think other people may enjoy. And that book is A Forgery of Roses by Jessica S. Olsen. So first off, the cover's stunning. Like, you can't go wrong with this cover. This is a really interesting story. So in this world, the magic system is art-based. So say you didn't like something about your face. This is a really weird example. Say there's like a mole here. You didn't like it. If a person possesses magic, they could paint a portrait of you without the mole, and then that mole would disappear. And that can be applied in a lot of really creative ways, depending on how powerful the magic user is and how much they know about their abilities. So the art-based magic system is extremely unique and really, really cool. And the main character has this magic. She's trying to hide it. She's trying to ensure that nobody finds out about this, until this wealthy woman asks her to paint her dog, and she heals like a very small part of the dog that's almost not noticeable. But the lady notices and remembers this, and comes back to her and asks her to kind of solve and bring her dead son back to life, which is nuts, because he was just murdered like a day ago. And so she obviously also has a very limited amount of time to solve this mystery, because his body's going to decompose. And kind of the way they paint the magic is you have to know how this happened in order to be able to like paint it away, in a sense. So she kind of has to go along while she's trying to do this task for this lady. She also has to kind of go along and try to solve the mystery with the brother of the victim. So the concept was really unique and really interesting. The execution was okay. I liked it. It wasn't a favorite, but I did really enjoy it as I was reading it. There are things I would have changed about it, but this isn't a review, this is a recommendation. If you really enjoy gothic scenery, gothic tones, really unique magic systems, semi-murder mystery elements, and unsure who to trust situations, I think you would like this book. Again, like I said a million times, the magic system is really unique. There's a lot of relationship tension because she is like in poverty, so she's not of high social standing, trying to help this family of high social standing, so they kind of look down upon her and want her to do this quickly and efficiently so they don't have to come out that their son is dead. So there's a lot of kind of different moving pieces to this. It is a standalone, which is kind of surprising to me, based on how it ends, but also just like as you're going through, you just assume that there will be a series of this. But I would say if you want like a quick read that, you know, it's a standalone, it's not a series, you want some unique magic, I would pick this up. This next category would be if you want an adult fantasy that's eerie. So the first one I'm going to talk about is my favorite book of all time, and that is Vicious by B.E. Schwab. This is more of a urban fantasy, so it's kind of based on the idea of superheroes, supervillains, people with superhuman abilities. So you're following Victor and Eli. It kind of starts off sort of dark academia as well. They are in university and they're trying to find a like scientific medical way to give people superhuman abilities. So they're trying to find basically like a formula in order to have the powers emerge from the person. But in order to do so, you have to kill them and bring them back to life, potentially. So they kind of like have that dialogue, but this story is like in several different timelines. So at the beginning of the book, you know that they are nemesis. They are like enemies, they are not friends anymore, and you don't know why. And it's obviously set in the future, and then you're kind of going flashbacks to 10 years ago, 5 days ago, today, stuff like that. And so they are now enemies, and you're trying to figure out what happened as you go through the story, and you're like piecing everything together. but there obviously are some fantastic elements because a lot of the people in this book that you're interacting with are EOs, which are extraordinary. So they have these superhuman abilities. It's fantastic. It's kind of a revenge story. There's killings that are happening, so it's not necessarily a murder mystery, but there are very morally gray, sinister elements. I would say if you love morally gray characters, this book is for you because it feels like every single character in this is morally gray. It is a fantastic book. I was hooked from the first time I picked it up, and I felt like I looked at my husband and I said, I feel like nothing has happened and I can't put this book down. And it was just extremely well written. It is spooky. There's a lot of elements that are creepy, but it's also just like got such great dialogue between the characters and what happened and like trying to get to this showdown. And it's just fantastic. So if you're just looking for something that's a little bit more vicious to read, I would highly recommend this book. If you like revenge, if you like tension, if you like figuring out interpersonal dynamics of why people are falling apart from one another and why they hate each other, pick this up. It's fantastic. I will always shout this book from the rooftops because it's my favorite. The next book I'm going to talk about is going to be Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro. So this is for if you want a historical fantasy book that is extremely creepy and eerie. I would say this one toes the line with horror, to be honest. There are extremely creepy elements to this book. It is a historical fantasy. It's set in 1882, so there are elements of, European culture, and also it travels around to a lot of different locations. So you're following a detective that is kind of like traveling and trying to get these kids with talents and take them to this institute in Edinburgh where they will be safe, or so you think. And so you're following the detective. They're going to England, they're going to America and Asia and just all of these different places trying to find these kids. So there's like historical elements where one of them is a slave in America and it's horrid what's happening. And one of them is kind of an outcast in Europe trying to hide their talents. There's a lot of different elements to this. It jumps around a lot. So if you like reading stories with a lot of different perspectives, this is for you. And while they're gathering these children, there is a shadow man that is hunting them and you don't know why. And he's got these really crazy abilities. So if you like creatures that are creepy, if you like sinister, eerie elements, if you like creepy atmospheric writing and things coming for you, but you like it to be very historical and there are fantasy elements, but the fantasy magic elements aren't very well explained, this is for you. I would say definitely pick this up if you want it to be really, really creepy and you want children with abilities, but you really just want it to be historical in this setting and not this like fantasy, high fantasy world. This would be great for you. It's also really interesting to try to delve into all of the different characters and what their motives are. If you like really creepy scenes with things in jars, this is for you. Yeah, I don't really know how else to tell you about this book without like spoiling plot points, but I would say the little things that I've touched on are very encompassing in this story. And basically they want these kids to be safe and they don't know how to keep them safe from this looming threat. So if that sounds interesting to you at all, pick up this book. It is absolutely creepy, so if that's what you're looking for, look no further. It's here. The next one I would love to mention that I am reading currently in love but haven't finished yet is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. So if you're looking for a fantasy that's eerie, look no further. This is a really interesting book. It's got a very gothic, dark setting. You're following a character who has a secret and she really needs help to be able to stay safe. And she has this thing, this dark spirit living in her mind that she calls the Nightmare. And he helps protect her and he helps keep her secrets, but he could also be her downfall. So you're following this character, she has this secret, right? She has this nightmare in her head, which is super cool and really interesting how it's kind of told and how you get to see his voice and his inflections. So he's in her mind and he'll just like emerge every so often and you'll hear him talk or she'll hear his like claws clicking. Like it's really creepy, but really cool. And the magic system is tarot cards. So it's really interesting, really unique. I really enjoy it, but I feel like that's really hard to grasp until you read it. So basically there are cards, there's a deck of cards. They're extremely valuable and have different magical properties depending on what the card is. So say there's like 7 of this card, so there's like 7 black horses, and if you have this card and you tap it, you can access the magic in the card, and that will give you extreme strength and speed while you're using the card. And then you tap it again and you can kind of turn it off, and then you can keep the card like on your person, and you can use it at will whenever you would like. But in this world, magic has a price, and so you can wield the magic, but if you wield too much of it, bad things happen to you. And it's really, really cool how this world is being built. Again, I'm only like 100 and so pages into it, so I haven't delved into the world completely, but it's a really interesting scenario. And I guess I should tell you more of the plot. So this is happening to her, and she needs to save the kingdom of Blunder because this magic is wreaking havoc. Like I said, magic has a price. They were never supposed to have it, and it's causing this mist around the town and in the forest. And if you go into it, you like die, lose your mind, are overtaken, never seen from again. So the magic is extremely dangerous, and they're trying to eradicate it by uniting all of the cards and taking it into the heart of the forest. And when she meets a mysterious highwayman, she ends up teaming up with them, and they're on this quest to save the kingdom. So like I said, the magic system is extremely unique and really, really interesting. And there's also levels of like trying to hide who you are so you're not killed or seen as a threat, while they're also trying to wield magic in a way that's not gonna harm them. But the setting is extremely lush, dark, gothic, like darkness, cold, mist, really creepy nightmare in your head. People are out to get you. There's like mysterious elements underlining a lot of things that haven't been explained yet, at least for me as I'm reading it, and the like secret intentions of the royal family. So it's all very interesting and intriguing. And if that at all sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend this book already, even though I haven't finished it, because the magic system is just so unique and interesting. And I already really love the nightmare like popping in her head and giving commentary, even though he's really creepy and probably has the worst intentions and he is actually evil. But it's been a really interesting read so far, very unique. So I think this will be a favorite of mine once I finish it, and hopefully I'll get to read more of it today. But if you're looking for something dark, lush, and creepy, look no further. Next one I will like briefly touch on because I feel like a lot of people know about this book would be A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. I actually don't own a copy of this. I listened to it from the library. But this is a book that's basically following a witch who kind of has tamped down her powers and doesn't really see the purpose or the need to use her abilities and just kind of wants to ignore them. Therefore, they're not being fleshed out to help her. She just wants to study literature and do her thing in the academia world. Until she stumbles upon an ancient grimoire, and then everyone is kind of like after her, essentially. And she meets a mysterious vampire that is going to kind of assist her, maybe protect her, maybe help them figure out whatever power is being unleashed. So it's a good book. I would say it's a little bit of a slower start to a book. There is fantasy elements, obviously, and very paranormal aspects. Witches, vampires, werewolves, I think. There's like a lot of different magical creatures like that. Kind of got the dark academia setting. It's kind of got like some sci-fi elements if you get to the end of the first book. That's kind of crazy. It is kind of like a Twilight-esque thing for adults where there is like a vampire romance, but like I can't be with you because I'm a vampire and you're a witch and all this stuff. There's also really cool elements of her learning how to use her abilities and her aunts helping her because it's kind of like also Sabrina-like. It's fun. It's a good adult fantasy book that's kind of on the more of the verge of paranormal, but there are, you know, creepy elements as there are all these magical creatures, grimoires, and people trying to harm her. So if that sounds interesting to you, obviously pick that up. I did really enjoy it when I read the first book, and I know my friend Christy has read the trilogy and really enjoyed it, thought the whole trilogy as a whole was good. So if you want witches and vampires with like a touch of romance, but a lot of cool world building and story building elements, maybe check this book out. Because it's a little bit eerie, but it's not scary. And the next recommendation is if you want something kind of spooky, but you also want something kind of lighthearted and nostalgic, I would recommend reading Long Live the Pumpkin Queen by Shay Earnshaw. So if you don't know about this book, The Nightmare Before Christmas, I'm sure you've heard of that movie even if you don't like it, is following Jack Skellington as he's kind of trying to figure out his identity as the Pumpkin King in Halloween Town. And Sally is in that story, and this is her story of getting together with Jack and becoming the Pumpkin Queen. And it's her own finding herself story. She's discovering who she is. She's discovering she doesn't know if she wants to be a queen, but she wants to be with Jack, and how does she kind of reconcile those two things? Where did she come from? Because she doesn't look like everybody else in Halloween Town. And exploring a lot of other worlds. And she ends up stumbling into Dreamtown and ends up unleashing a threat. And while this had like scenes that were creepy, so it's like, you know, good Halloween atmosphere, I wouldn't say this book is scary or anything like that. Like, there are some creepy elements, but overall, I think it's really like lighthearted and nostalgic. She's trying to save the day, so you're rooting for her. And if you love Nightmare Before Christmas, it's just gonna kind of give you warm and fuzzies and make you feel nostalgic about Nightmare Before Christmas when you watch that growing up, or whatever it looked like for you. So if you're looking for that kind of a vibe and you would really like to expand the Nightmare Before Christmas story, I would recommend this book. The next recommendation is if you want creepy elements and a fantasy romance, then I would recommend books from this one author, 2 separate books from this one author. The first one being Rhapsodic by Laura Thalassa. This is the first book in the Bargainer series, and you're following Callie, who is a siren living in modern day. So it's kind of an urban fantasy where it's modern day, but there are some magical creatures. There's also a separate world that is fae. And Callie ends up making deals with this bargainer who is like Death himself. He's this very scary like edgelord. Like, when you ask him for a favor and he says, yes, I will do that, but you have to repay me, it's always horrible and more than you've ever anticipated paying back. So he's kind of this like edgelord character, but he's fae. So he's very scary, like Death incarnate type character. Mafia boss maybe thing. And she ends up making a ton of deals with him when she is 17, to the point where she has like 300 favors or something she owes him, and he disappears for 7 years, and suddenly he's back and he wants to collect. So I recommend this book for the fantasy romance elements, but also the eerie elements, because there are scenes and pieces of this where they are trying to solve a, I'm gonna say murder mystery, but it's more so of, there are women that are falling asleep and they're never waking up. So like Sleeping Beauty type syndrome, and they don't know what's causing it and they don't know how to stop it. They're also giving birth to these insanely creepy children. So trigger warning or something if that freaks you out. But they're giving birth to these really, really creepy children that are like demons. And there's scenes where you interact with the children, and it's just really, really, really eerie. So if you like the idea of having a fantasy romance, but on the side there's also this storyline happening of trying to solve this mystery, I would recommend this, because there are pretty creepy elements to this series so far. There's 3 books, I've read the first 2. So there's really creepy elements to it, but the story in itself is also really cool, and there is the romance, you know, on the side as well. So if that sounds interesting, grab this. And the next one by Laura Thalassa is Pestilence, and this is book 1 in the 4 Horsemen series. There are 4 books. And the reason I would recommend this is creepy is because there are very gruesome elements to it. You're following a different main character for every book and a different horseman. So it's following the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, so it is like dystopian apocalyptic genre. Set in modern day, wherever it is. This one's in Canada, I believe. And because the 4 horsemen bring something to the world, so this one's bringing pestilence, you know, sickness, people are dying, it's really gruesome and horrible. Each horseman brings a separate thing. This one you're following Pestilence, who again is bringing sickness. And they're trying to off him so this stops happening to humanity, but he is unable to be killed. And she ends up getting kidnapped by him because she tried to kill him. And he's like, you are going to pay by living, and I'm going to torture you, essentially. So you're following those characters, and I would say this is gruesome elements because there's a lot of, again, attempts on killing him, but he doesn't die. So like if you're chopping him to pieces, he's going to regenerate, but it's going to be slow. So there's gruesome elements in that sense, but also gruesome elements of like people getting sick and then it dragging out and dying. So there's a lot of like creepy, gruesome elements in that sense, but it's not like jump scares or anything like that. Just more so kind of hard topics. So I would pick that up if that sounds interesting to you. Okay, this next category is if you want something kind of gruesome, but it's for people that don't want to have nightmares. So there are like sinister elements to this, but nothing so crazy that you can't sleep at night. The first one I will talk about is All of Us Villains. So this is a duology. I would recommend both of them for this, by Amanda Foody and Christine Lynn Herman. This is pitched as Hunger Games with magic. So there's so it's set in this town where there was a book published about all of the families, because these 7 families, each blood moon, which is like every 50 years, compete in this tournament, and they're magically bonded to the tournament, and whoever wins the tournament wins high magic for their family, which is extremely valuable and needed, and only that family can use the high magic if they win, and the rest of them just kind of have to figure it out as they go. So it's a huge advantage and just good with social standing and everything. And the way they win the tournament is they kill all of the other champions. So it's a killing tournament, families like pitted against each other, and sending their children into this tournament, wanting them to win, trying to prepare them as much as possible to win. And also elements of like monster stories intertwined. And I don't mean there's like actual like werewolves, monsters in the book, but more so like painting the champions as monsters and trying to get them to do monstrous things, which you have to, because you're either surviving and killing or you're killing to win. The magic is really interesting in this because it's tied to like wearing magic rings and being able to like imbue spells into the rings to be able to wield them. And it's a killing tournament. So there are like sinister elements to this, and everyone's like pitted against each other. There's betrayal, there's hard feelings of whoever's publishing this book because it's talking about secrets of the families, and it's kind of just painted as like this is no big deal, you're just gonna go in and slaughter all these people. So I would say if you're looking for like sinister elements, stuff like that, that's like bloody, vicious, go for something like this because there is magic, it is fantasy, but it's just so interesting to see all of the inner monologues of the 5 different perspectives you get and how they're each going about thinking about this tournament, thinking about themselves, and going into it and trying to survive or kill. So I would definitely recommend this. This is one of my favorite reads. It's definitely a 5-star for me. The next one would be Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is a really interesting book. So it's really funny, but also very dark. So it's kind of more of a dark fairy tale. You're following the main character, Mara, who is living her life kind of as like a nun, and her sister was married off to the prince, who ends up being this like horrible human being. And he's very like abusive and evil, and she decides that she wants to save her sister from this by taking him down, but he's kind of untouchable. And so she ends up going to a dust wife who's kind of like a witch and seeking her help, and the dust wife gives her 3 impossible tasks to complete, and if she completes them, then she will be able to take down the prince. And so she goes on this journey with the dust wife and then ends up like enlisting the help of a shamed knight and a fairy godmother who's really good at cursing and a demon-possessed chicken. And they kind of go on this journey to try to save the kingdom from this prince and her sister. And it's got amazing humor, like for how kind of dark and gritty and hard topic tackling this book is. It's hilarious. It's written so well. It's really short and amazing, and just like so witty and humorous. The humor was like kind of dark and edgy and absolutely up my alley, and something that I really enjoyed about this. Laugh out loud funny, but also handling like horrible situations. And it's got kind of the dark fairy tale elements in like she has to weave a cloak of nettle and bone in one of the challenges, and like her fingers are sore and falling apart and splintered and raw. So it's like kind of fairy tale-esque, but not cutesy fairy tale-esque. This was a fantastic read, and I think it would be just like really good atmospheric for fall and Halloween time, because it's not like scary, but it's dark. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend it. There's one character, Bone Dog, which is a skeleton of a dog, and he's like reanimated. It's so good. It's so good. So if you're looking for something a little bit more lighthearted in tone with the humor, but also dark and handling like abuse, this is a great book for you. The next one I would like to talk about is Gallant by V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab can write a lot of creepy stuff. So this is following Olivia, who is living in an orphanage. She has no living relatives that she's aware of. and she can also kind of see ghouls and ghosts. Until one day she gets a letter from her uncle that's saying they're sending somebody to come get her to bring her to Gallant, her home, because her mother had passed away years ago, and she has a journal from her mother, and that's her only tie to her family, but the journal says to never return to Gallant. So Olivia obviously does not listen to this and goes to her uncle's beck and call until she arrives and realizes nobody at the house actually sent her her letter and her uncle is not there. And so there are creepy elements to this of like seeing ghouls and stuff like that. And also there's a gate that she's never supposed to cross, and she does, and there's like a shadow reflection of Gallant. So that's kind of like what you see in the cover and on the back when it says everything casts a shadow, even the world we live in. So she's able to like go into this other world, and it's a creepy version of hers where these ghouls and stuff are. There are kind of like really tense elements where it's like thrilling, so a thriller type aspect where you're like, ooh, don't get caught, or ooh, oh no, run away, kind of things. But I wouldn't say it's like scary, but it is creepy, it is eerie, it's very like dark theming, and death is personified in this book as well, but it's a much darker version. So I've heard it compared to like Secret Garden. I haven't read that book, but kind of like a dark, creepy Secret Garden-esque story. I really loved this book. I think it was really well done and definitely had some eerie elements. So if that interests you at all, I would pick up this book. If you like gardening and dark literature, here you go. We're done soon, and then we can have snackies maybe. Do you want snackies? I do too. You're such a big baby. Yeah, you're such a big baby. You looking out the window? Okay, this next one I'm gonna throw in this category is much more on the lighter side. There's like some sinister elements, some like slightly gruesome elements, but I would say it's not bad overall. Would be Hotel Magnifique by Emily J. Taylor. So this is very reminiscent to Caraval. It seems like a mix between Caraval and the Night Circus, and something a little bit more sinister. It kind of has Caraval vibes as like a traveling magical thing and following two sisters. So kind of how Hotel Magnifique goes is there is a magical hotel that travels, like physically travels to different locations, and inside it, magic is real. Whereas in the rest of the world, it's not, because it was deemed as dangerous when people were manifesting magic. So now the only people that can wield magic live here, and they're able to perform magic in a safe environment. And it's kind of this like really mysterious thing, and everyone wants to stay there, and it's extremely expensive to get into. And so these two sisters end up signing up to work for it so that they can experience Hotel Magnifique. And they get to do so, but they have to sign contracts, and all the guests also have to sign contracts. And they sign away their memories of their stay. And so everyone leaves and they have no idea what happened, but they're like blissfully happy. And as they're signing their contracts to work, they figure out that maybe there are more sinister elements at play, and maybe it's going to take more than what they bargained for or want to give. I would say this has like some mystery elements, and it's also very, whimsical, magical as you're going through the hotel, and there's all these like crazy things happening, like cotton candy clouds on the ceiling or something. So there's really interesting, fun, whimsical elements. But there's also darker tones, as like somebody messes up a performance and then they go missing, or things like that. The more you're delving into the story and learning more about the characters and why they're doing what they're doing that work at the hotel, and you're kind of like trying to solve what's going on and figure out why they're traveling, why they're like looking for something. And her sister ends up going missing while she's there, and she's trying to find her, which is kind of why it's a little bit reminiscent to Caraval. So there's like a little bit of sinister undertones, and there's a couple of like gruesome scenes. Overall, it's like a fun read. So I would say if you're wanting something on the scary side, but you're a wimp like me, this would be something to pick up. I did really enjoy this book. It was really whimsical and cool. I know some people didn't like it, but I really did. I would say the magic system's not super explained, but it's kind of just, the whimsical element that you just kind of have to embrace. But it is a little bit creepy, so maybe this is a good option for you. Okay, and then the last book we're going to talk about today is if you want kind of a gothic fairy tale retelling, then I would recommend Gilded by Marissa Meyer. So Gilded is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, if you can't tell by the cover, and you're following the main character who has this character trait, I guess, of kind of weaving stories or being untruthful. And the wild hunt exists in this book, and they come and they steal people if you're caught outside after dark on these full moons or whenever they come. I can't exactly remember. And she is caught outside trying to help some fairies, and the Earthling interrogates her, and she tells him a lie that she knows how to spin hay into gold. And he ends up inviting her, which is basically like kidnapping her every so often when he does come to the mortal world, because it's like only on full moons or something like that. He ends up taking her to his castle and demanding that she spin straw into gold. And she cannot do it because she was lying, and so she's kind of like trying to survive the situation because he's extremely dark and sinister and evil. And so you're kind of following her story. The atmosphere is very spooky because she goes into his castle and there's all of the wild hunt. You know, their idea of entertainment is not great and not what humans would think of as entertainment. But he's only there like on the full moon. So when he's gone, that castle is like a haunted castle almost. So the castle's like in shambles. It wasn't elegant like when she was there. And there are creatures that are horrifying that like are lurking through, but they kind of like stay near the castle. And there's a village outside of it that she visits. And they kind of tell her like, do not go to the castle, like you will never come back. You'll never be seen again. And everyone just kind of tolerates the wild hunt and the Earthling because they don't know what else to do. And so they like give him food, throw festivals for him, like all of this stuff because they don't want to be his victim and they don't want to incur his wrath. So this was pretty creepy when you're reading it. It's like dark, creepy. The ending is horrifying. So I would say if you want like a very dark gothic fairy tale retelling, and I mean like legit fairy tale, because actual fairy tales are scary. If you want something like that, I would pick up this book. I really enjoyed this book. It is a duology, and the second book is coming out in November. So maybe a good time to read it. That way you can read it during spooky season and then read the next one when it comes out. I would say if you have issues with bad things happening to good people, I would say if you have an issue with children being in danger, maybe shy away from this book. But otherwise, it was spooky, it was creepy, it's dark. I would say this is the darkest thing Marissa Meyer has written, and you should pick this book up. I did really enjoy it, but it was a little bit sad at the end. It's a duology, so we'll see what happens. But there is like a little bit of a romance too that's very cute, so it's kind of, it sounds like it's all over the place. It's not all over the place, but it just kind of gives you a little bit of a roller coaster of emotions. But yes, very dark, very creepy. If that's what you want during spooky season, this is for you. All right, everyone. Well, I know that was a lot of books that I just threw at you, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys some variety of books that I have read or have started to read and kind of got a little bit of a feel for, so that you had some reading recommendations for spooky season. Hopefully one of these or a couple of these stood out to you that you're just like, yes, I want to read that. That sounds great. So hopefully this was helpful and able to give you some ideas of what you would like to read during this season or around Halloween. As always, I would love to hear your opinions on any of these books if you've read them, or any recommendations you have for me to read during spooky season. It's always a pleasure, so thank you so much for watching, and hopefully you pick up one of these books and love it. Please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you next time. Stay safe and caffeinated. Bye!